My name is Eleanor Grant, and I am 66 years old. By the time all this happened, I had already lived a full life, one of quiet routines, healed bruises from old battles, and a hard-won sense of peace. My husband, David, passed 8 years earlier, and since then I had lived alone in the modest but beautifully restored farmhouse my parents left me. I never expected to remarry or rebuild, but life has a funny way of opening doors when you least expect it. My son, Daniel, married a woman named Rebecca, polished, confident, and often a little too ambitious for her own good. I tried to welcome her warmly. I understood the delicate dance between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. I held back opinions, offered help only when asked, and kept my distance when it seemed easier on everyone. I thought it was working. When Daniel announced that they were expecting their first child, my heart opened even more. Rebecca seemed warmer then, kinder, more grounded. I thought it was a turning point. But good moments can be misleading. Sometimes warmth is simply a pause between storms. When Rebecca asked me one afternoon if I would consider moving in with them once the baby arrived, I felt genuinely touched. She said she wanted the baby to know their grandmother, and that she trusted my experience. I didn't know it then, but this was the first step in a much larger plan, one I never saw coming. They had just bought a house. Well, Daniel had bought the house, or so I assumed. A spacious, modern home about 20 minutes away. They invited me often during renovations, asking for my thoughts on paint colors and flooring. I felt included, valued. It reminded me of the early years of marriage with David, when we rebuilt our farmhouse plank by plank. But sometimes, belonging can be a carefully crafted illusion. One sunny afternoon, while I was helping Rebecca fold baby blankets in the nursery, she said lightly, "It's funny how life works out. I never thought I'd share a house with my mother-in-law." I laughed gently. "Well, only if you really want me here. You two need your own space." "Oh, of course," she replied with a smile I couldn't quite read. "But everyone needs a guardian of the house." Her phrasing stuck with me. Guardian, a strange word, oddly formal. I brushed it off then. I was slow to assume the worst about people. Life had taught me to be cautious, but not cynical. The day before the baby shower, Daniel seemed distracted. His answers were short, his mind elsewhere. I thought it was work stress. I had no idea something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. At the time, life felt peaceful. Predictable. Almost serene. But deep down, something in my chest tugged, a quiet warning, barely a whisper. Trouble, I would learn, rarely announces itself. It moves silently, setting pieces in place long before you recognize the game. I didn't know it yet, but my mother-in-law role was about to morph into something entirely different. I was unknowingly stepping toward a conflict that would test not only my patience, but my very sense of justice. And the first hint of the storm arrived in the form of a thin white envelope placed delicately on my kitchen table the next morning, a document I hadn't asked for, one that would change everything. I hadn't yet opened it. And when I finally did, the first sentence made my hands tremble. It was early morning when I opened the envelope. I remember the sound, the faint tearing of paper echoing in my quiet kitchen. I had no reason to suspect anything unusual. I assumed it was a baby shower schedule or maybe a thank you note for the handmade quilt I'd finished for the nursery. But instead, inside was a document titled, "Request for Title Amendment, Property Ownership." I stared at it, confused. I read the first paragraph 3 times before the meaning settled like cold iron in my stomach. The form listed the address of Daniel and Rebecca's new house. Under current owner, only Daniel's name appeared, as expected. But under proposed additional owner, I saw 2 names. Rebecca Grant. Eleanor Grant. Me. My name. Next to hers. A request to add me as a co-owner of their house. But that wasn't the part that made my heart pound. Under the section titled Reason for Title Modification, in neat, deliberate handwriting, it said, "As agreed verbally between all parties, Eleanor intends to contribute her property to the family estate." To protect all family assets equitably, shared ownership is necessary. I read it again. Contribute her property. Her property, meaning my farmhouse. The place my parents built. The home I restored after my husband died. My refuge, my anchor. No such agreement existed. None. Ever. My breathing turned shallow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. Someone had inserted my name into an official request to imply I was merging my property with theirs. And if the lawyer receiving this believed it was a mutual arrangement, I could be drawn into a legal maze that would jeopardize everything I owned. The thought felt unreal. I called Daniel immediately. He didn't answer. So I called again. No answer. I texted him. Just 3 words, call me now. Silence. A creeping dread began to form, the kind that tells you someone you love is not only hiding something, but trying very hard to avoid telling you. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. She sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. Eleanor, hi. Everything okay? I kept my voice steady. I received a document about adding me to the title of your house. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Oh, that, she said lightly. It's just a formality. You'll be living with us, so it makes sense legally. But my own property is mentioned. Well, she hesitated, then her tone softened, almost patronizing. Daniel and I just figured it was time to consolidate. It's what families do. There's no need to get anxious about it. I never agreed to that. Maybe not directly, she said. But you offered to help us. This is just the legal side of things. I felt something cold settle in my bones. I need to speak to Daniel. He's busy, she replied. This is really between us women, anyway. That sentence, that casual dismissal, between us women, struck something deep. A warning, sharp and unmistakable. I haven't signed anything, I told her. Oh, of course, she said sweetly. But once you talk to the lawyer, I'm sure it'll all make sense. The words were an ending. A shutdown. I knew then, clear as sunrise, that something was terribly wrong. Someone was trying to lay claim to my home. And whoever it was believed I was just naive enough to let it happen. The betrayal wasn't complete yet. It was just beginning. And the next revelation would be far worse. I spent that afternoon walking through my farmhouse slowly, touching the worn wooden banisters and sun-warmed window frames. My home had history etched into every inch of it. My mother's handwriting was still penciled inside the kitchen cabinets. My late husband's initials were carved into the oak bench by the front door. The house held my grief, my triumphs, my family's story. The idea that someone, my daughter-in-law, would dare imply it was up for redistribution made me nauseous. And yet, a part of me wasn't fully surprised. Rebecca had always been ambitious. She grew up in a family where money was synonymous with control. Her parents measured success by property, cars, investments, and influence. I had seen it at their holiday dinners, conversations about trust funds, inheritance, and strategic marriages. I had brushed off the discomfort then, telling myself that people can live differently and still coexist. But the truth is, motives are often rooted in upbringing. I remembered an incident from early in their marriage. Daniel and Rebecca had just moved into a small apartment. They were struggling financially then, student loans, job instability, medical bills from a surgery Daniel needed. I had helped them quietly, paying for groceries now and then, slipping them gas money, covering a minor medical expense. One evening, Rebecca cornered me near the sink during a family dinner. "You don't need to help us," she had said sharply. "If Daniel's salary isn't enough, he should negotiate harder. Supporting him financially only makes him dependent." I'd been startled by her tone. It wasn't gratitude, it was criticism. As if I'd overstepped by caring for my son. She continued, I'm not letting our future be affected by pity money. It wasn't the phrase itself that stung. It was the entitlement behind it. The assumption that she alone determined what was acceptable. In hindsight, that moment was an early window into her worldview. Money was power. Control. Security. Leverage. And now that she and Daniel owned a house, her hunger for security had grown into something sharper. I also remembered the subtle ways she'd questioned the farmhouse over the years. During visits, she'd say things like, "This place is worth a lot. Have you ever considered selling it? Do you have a will? You should. It protects everyone. You live alone. Wouldn't it be smarter to consolidate assets?" Her comments had unsettled me, but I'd told myself she was just practical, or simply curious. But no. These questions weren't casual. They weren't harmless. They were reconnaissance. Rebecca wasn't just interested in my home. She was planning for it. And the worst part was realizing that Daniel had said nothing. Not then, not now. Did he know what she was doing? Was he agreeing with her? Or was he too overwhelmed, too manipulated, to push back? I needed answers. Real answers. That evening, as I stood by the living room window watching the sun sink behind the hill, I made a decision: I would not be blindsided again. I would gather my own information. Quietly. Carefully. Methodically. If someone was drawing up legal papers using my name, forging agreements, or misrepresenting my intentions, I needed proof of their actions, not guesses. My revenge would not be loud. It would not be chaotic. It would be factual. Precise. Unshakable. So the next morning, I made an appointment with the law firm listed on the document. I didn't announce it to Daniel or Rebecca. They would learn soon enough. And what I discovered at that meeting shook me even more than the document in the envelope. I arrived at the law office on Wednesday morning precisely at 9. It was a quiet, well-appointed place with framed certificates lining the walls and soft instrumental music drifting through the air. The receptionist greeted me politely, and within minutes I was led into a corner office with large windows overlooking the street. The lawyer, a composed woman in her 40s named Margaret Hale, stood to greet me. "Mrs. Grant, thank you for coming in. I understand you have concerns about a title amendment request." Her tone was warm, but measured. She had the voice of someone used to delivering unpleasant truths carefully. I handed her the envelope. "I didn't submit this," I said calmly. "And I never agreed to anything described in it." She nodded and began reviewing the document. Her eyes moved line by line. Then she turned to her computer and pulled up a digital file. She clicked. Scrolled. Paused. "I see," she murmured. Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. "Mrs. Grant," she said finally, folding her hands on the desk, "this form was submitted electronically last week. But the concerning part is that the submission included scanned supplemental notes." "What kind of notes?" I asked. She turned the screen slightly toward me. On it was a brief letter, typed, not handwritten. At the bottom was a scanned signature. My signature. Or rather, a rough imitation of it. The letter read, "I, Eleanor Grant, agree to transfer partial rights of my property located at 52 Meadow Lane to join the family estate of my son Daniel and his wife Rebecca. I authorize the addition of my name to their property title to reflect mutual ownership." My throat tightened. "I never wrote that," I whispered. Margaret nodded gravely. "I suspected as much. The formatting is inconsistent with authentic testimony. And the signature, well, it's similar, but not consistent enough to be legally reliable." I felt heat rise in my chest. Anger. Deep, clean anger, the kind you get when someone attempts to rob you not just of a possession, but of your autonomy. "Who submitted it?" I asked. "The submission came from an email address belonging to your daughter-in-law." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Confirmation. Undeniable. Rebecca had forged my signature, tried to alter property records, and used the phrase family estate, as if she alone had authority to define what belonged to whom. When I opened my eyes, the lawyer was watching me carefully. "There's more," she said. My heart thudded. "More?" She clicked another file. "This is an internal note from your daughter-in-law's consultation appointment with our junior associate. She outlined her intention for long-term asset consolidation. She claimed you were elderly, unwell, and seeking to simplify your affairs." I stiffened. Unwell? Elderly in the legal capacity sense? She was painting me as incompetent. If this amendment had been processed incorrectly, Margaret continued, it could have created a legal pathway to tie your property into theirs. If anything happened to you, your farmhouse could be interpreted as shared marital property between them. My vision blurred for a moment, as if someone had knocked the air out of me. This wasn't misguided helpfulness. This was a strategy. A planned, calculated attempt to secure access to my home and its value, under the guise of family unity. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "What are my options?" I asked. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and controlled. "We document everything. We freeze the request. And then, we prepare to confront this properly." I exhaled. A confrontation was coming. Not the explosive kind, but the precise, fact-based one that dismantles lies brick by brick. And the next step would require gathering more evidence, every text, every comment, every suspicious suggestion Rebecca had ever made. Because if she wanted a legal fight, she would discover quickly that I was not a woman who surrendered what was hers. And the truth I uncovered next would turn the entire situation on its head. I spent the next 2 days combing through old messages, emails, and voicemails. Every casual suggestion Rebecca had made about my house, every nudge toward consolidation, became part of a growing file. I found a text from 6 months earlier that chilled me. "When the baby comes, it'll be easier if everything is in one estate. You won't want the burden of maintaining the farmhouse alone. Maybe we can talk about transferring things gradually." Transferring things. Gradually. As if my home were a worn-out couch to be passed along. Another message, sent late at night. "Daniel agrees that long-term planning is important. You don't want mistakes in your will to cause family conflict." Mistakes in my will? I had a perfectly clear, legally established will. She knew that. But pressure, persistent, manipulative pressure, had been building quietly over time. I added every piece to the file. Meanwhile, Margaret, the lawyer, continued her own investigation. On Friday morning, she called me. "Mrs. Grant," she began gently, "I think you should come in. We've uncovered something crucial." Her tone carried weight. I dressed carefully, steady clothes for a steady mind, and drove to the office. When I entered her room, she motioned for me to sit. We checked county deed records. "The property your son and daughter-in-law bought," she paused, then continued with clinical precision. "It is owned solely by your son. Rebecca is not listed anywhere on the title or the mortgage." My breath caught. "What? Your son purchased the house independently using his own credit and a private inheritance from your late husband's estate. Rebecca contributed nothing financially. According to the record, she is not an owner in any legal capacity." I sat very still. "She isn't on the title at all?" I asked quietly. "No. Not even as a secondary or future interest. And unless your son files a formal amendment, she has no claim to the property." I folded my hands. "So the person trying to add me to the title doesn't legally own the house she's trying to modify?" Margaret nodded. "Correct. And that's important. Because her attempt to add you, and thereby create shared ownership, could be interpreted as an effort to secure her own indirect interest. So she tried to put herself on the house," I murmured, "by pulling me in first." "Yes," Margaret said. "If she succeeded, she could later advocate for a redistribution of shares." Or leverage your inclusion as justification for adding herself. A long silence followed. The pieces clicked together with painful clarity. Rebecca had no legal claim to the new house. Daniel had purchased it himself. She wanted security, control, access. And she was willing to forge, manipulate, and deceive to get it. But the most devastating truth came next. Margaret pulled out another paper. "Your son did not know about the amendment request," she said. "He called our office yesterday after we left him a message for clarification. He was confused and very upset." My chest tightened. "He didn't approve it?" I asked. "No. He told us that your daughter-in-law handled the paperwork for the house, but he had never discussed adding you to the title. He was shocked to hear about the signature." I closed my eyes, relief and heartbreak tangling together. Daniel wasn't part of this. He wasn't betraying me. He was lost in his wife's ambition. And, Margaret added carefully, he requested a meeting. "With you. And with us." "A confrontation," I said softly. She nodded. "Yes. And I recommend we hold it here, on neutral ground." I breathed out slowly. It was time. Time to lay out every document. Every forged signature. Every manipulative message. Every lie. Time to face Rebecca with unshakable truth. And as I rose from my chair, preparing for the meeting that would redefine our family, a single thought held steady in my mind. Justice was no longer a hope. It was a plan. We scheduled the meeting for Saturday morning. The office was quiet, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to unfold. I arrived early and sat in the conference room, my file neatly stacked in front of me. My hands were steady. My heart, calm. At 9 sharp, the door opened. Daniel entered first, pale, tense, eyes darting nervously. He gave me a small nod but didn't speak. Behind him came Rebecca, perfectly composed, wearing a soft beige coat and a thin, confident smile. "Eleanor," she said pleasantly, as if we were meeting for brunch. Margaret entered last, closing the door firmly behind her. "Please take a seat," she said. We all sat. A single, heavy silence filled the room. Margaret began. "We are here today because a title amendment request was submitted using Mrs. Grant's name. There are several issues with the submission that require clarification." Rebecca crossed her legs, projecting ease. "Of course. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." Margaret slid the forged letter onto the table. "Mrs. Grant stated she did not write or sign this." Rebecca glanced at it briefly. "I'm certain she did. Maybe she forgot. She can be forgetful sometimes." Daniel's eyes snapped toward her. "Mom isn't forgetful," he said sharply. Rebecca waved a hand. "I meant no harm. It was discussed casually a few months ago. Maybe she misremembered." I spoke quietly. "We never discussed merging my property with yours." "Not once." She smiled thinly. "Well, perhaps we interpreted the conversation differently." Margaret's voice remained neutral. "The signature does not match Mrs. Grant's legal signature. The formatting is inconsistent. And the submission came from your email address, Mrs. Grant." For the first time, Rebecca's expression tightened. "I was helping with paperwork." "It's not illegal to help." "It is illegal," Margaret corrected gently, "to submit documents containing forged signatures." Rebecca stiffened. Daniel looked at her, alarm widening in his eyes. "Rebecca, did you forge my mother's name?" Her tone sharpened. "I did what was necessary. We need security. I'm trying to protect our future." "By stealing my mother's house," he shot back. She bristled. "It wouldn't be stealing. It would be consolidating. She's alone. She doesn't need that farmhouse. We have a baby coming. We deserve stability." Margaret placed another document on the table. Mrs. Grant, your daughter-in-law told our associate that you were unwell and wanted assistance managing your assets. Daniel's head whipped toward her. You said she was sick. Rebecca faltered. I didn't say sick. I said she was aging. Vulnerable. It's not a crime to be concerned. Concerned? My voice was soft. Steady. Rebecca, you tried to place my name on a house you don't even own. And you tried to create a legal path to my property by claiming I had agreed to something I never even heard of. Rebecca's jaw clenched. A tiny crack in her composure. Margaret delivered the final blow. Legally speaking, Mrs. Grant, you have no ownership of the property your husband purchased, correct? Daniel frowned. Husband? My dad? No, Margaret said gently. I meant your husband, Mrs. Grant, your current spouse. The room went still. My current spouse? I repeated. Rebecca looked at Margaret sharply. She's widowed. Margaret opened one last document. According to public records, Mrs. Grant married 2 years ago in a private civil ceremony. Her spouse, Mr. Thomas Caldwell, transferred his property into a trust with her as sole beneficiary. Rebecca froze. Daniel's face contorted in confusion. Mom, you got married? I did, I said calmly. Quietly. After years of loneliness. We didn't announce it publicly at first because it felt sacred. Thomas is a private man. And the farmhouse? It's not just mine anymore. It's protected. Margaret continued, any attempt to merge her property with yours would require approval from both Mrs. Grant and her spouse. And the trust makes such transfers nearly impossible. Rebecca's face drained of color. Her plan had never involved 2 owners. Only one. One she assumed was isolated, vulnerable, and easily manipulated. I leaned forward slightly. Rebecca, I said softly, you wanted my home. You wanted security. I understand fear. I understand wanting safety for your child. But you tried to take something that wasn't yours by rewriting the truth. Her eyes flashed. You don't understand anything. I'm doing everything alone. Daniel never thinks about the future. I have to. I have to protect us. Daniel's voice cracked. By manipulating my mother? She looked at him with wild desperation. You don't know what it's like to worry every day. To feel like everything could slip away. Margaret raised a hand gently. Mrs. Grant, would you like to state your decision? I inhaled. And then delivered the truth that would reshape everything. I looked directly at Rebecca. Her breathing was shallow, her hands trembling slightly. Her confidence had collapsed under the weight of evidence. But this wasn't about humiliation, at least not for me. It was about clarity, justice, and boundaries long overdue. My decision, I said calmly, is simple. The room fell silent. You will withdraw the amendment request. In writing. Today. You will sign a statement acknowledging that you submitted forged documents without my consent. Her eyes widened. Eleanor. Let me finish. She swallowed. You will not handle any further legal or financial matters for Daniel without full transparency and his direct involvement. No more secret paperwork. No more manipulation. Daniel's face softened with relief, though his eyes were sorrowful. And, I continued, you will undergo 3 sessions with a family mediator. Not for punishment. For accountability. I will attend as well. Rebecca looked away, jaw tight. If you refuse, I said gently, I will pursue legal action. Including charges for document forgery. Her head snapped up. You wouldn't. I would, I said softly. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. She stared at me, one long, trembling stare, before her shoulders slumped. The fight left her eyes. I'll sign whatever you want, she whispered. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was small and raw and honest. Margaret drafted the withdrawal and acknowledgement documents. Rebecca signed them with a shaking hand. Daniel read them carefully, his expression heavy with disappointment but also relief. When the legal portion was finished, Daniel asked to speak privately. Rebecca stepped out into the hallway, leaving the two of us alone in the quiet conference room. "Mom," he said softly, sinking into the chair beside me. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." I placed my hand over his. "I know, sweetheart." He looked down. "I should have paid more attention. I let her handle too much. I didn't want to fight with her." "You were hoping marriage would balance itself," I said. "It doesn't. It needs intention." He nodded slowly. "Are you angry with me?" "No," I said. "But I want you to remember something important. Love can't thrive where fear controls the decisions." His eyes filled with quiet understanding. We left the office together. Rebecca trailed behind us, subdued and silent. The consequences were not over. There were still mediations to attend, still conversations to navigate, still healing to attempt. But the core damage had been contained. My house was safe. My autonomy was protected. The truth had been laid bare. And now, the focus shifted to rebuilding trust, but only where it could stand. The next weeks brought unexpected shifts in our family. Real shifts. Human ones. And that journey would bring its own kind of closure. In the weeks that followed, small changes began to shape our family dynamics. They weren't dramatic. They weren't instantaneous. But they were real. Rebecca attended the mediation sessions, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes tearfully, but always present. With guidance, she began to unpack the fears that had been quietly driving her behavior. Fear of instability. Fear of losing control. Fear of repeating her parents' mistakes. She apologized fully. Not just in words, but in accountability. She set boundaries with herself, relinquished financial control, and allowed Daniel to take ownership of their shared planning. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And progress matters. Daniel and I grew closer, not because of the confrontation, but because of the honesty that followed. We talked more. We listened better. He learned to stand firmer. I learned to step back when needed. And when their child was born, a quiet, wide-eyed little boy, they asked me to be present in the delivery room. I said yes. Not because everything was magically repaired, but because healing doesn't require perfection, only sincerity. As for my farmhouse, it stood unchanged. Sunlight still fell across the old oak floors. The wind still rustled through the curtains my mother sewed decades ago. Thomas, my quietly steadfast husband, smiled gently when I told him what had happened. Together, we updated the trust to include even stronger protections. Not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Life, I've learned, rarely gives you clean chapters. It gives you complicated people, imperfect relationships, and moments when truth becomes your compass. Rebecca and I are not close, not in the way some families are, but we are respectful now. Honest. Clear. And sometimes, clarity is the most profound peace you can ask for. As I sit on my porch in the soft light of evening, I realize something deeply true. Ethical revenge is simply justice delivered with calm, steady truth. It is accountability without cruelty. It is the strength to uphold your boundaries without abandoning compassion. We can confront wrongdoing without becoming hardened. We can protect what is ours while still offering grace. And perhaps most importantly, we can demand honesty, even from the people we hope to love. If you were listening to my story today, I'd like to ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment when someone tried to take what wasn't theirs, your time, your trust, your boundaries, your peace? And when you look back, what truth would you tell yourself then? Thank you for listening. If you want more stories like this, more justice, more healing, more quiet strength, Let me know what title I should tell next.